You know that couple, the one you see at dinner parties or on Instagram, or walking hand in hand through the park on a Sunday morning. They are sickeningly perfect. He is handsome, successful, charming. A man who opens doors and refills wine glasses before they're even empty. She is beautiful, elegant, an effortless hostess who cooks Michelin star meals without breaking a sweat. They look at each other with a gaze so intense, so full of adoration, that it makes you feel like an intruder just by witnessing it. You envy them. You wonder what their secret is. You wonder what it must be like to be loved that completely, that obsessively. Tonight, we are going to a dinner party at the home of Jack and Grace Angel. The house is magnificent, a pristine, sprawling property in the English countryside, tucked away behind high hedges and heavy iron gates. The driveway is crushed gravel, the kind that crunches satisfyingly under the tires of expensive cars. Inside, the lighting is warm and golden. The smell of roasting lamb and expensive perfume fills the air. Grace is wearing a dress that likely costs more than your car. She is smiling. She is always smiling. She moves through the room with a fluid grace, attending to her guests, laughing at their jokes, touching Jack's arm affectionately. Jack watches her. He never takes his eyes off her. He tells the guests how lucky he is. He tells them how he saved her, how she saved him. Everyone sighs. Oh, Jack. Oh, Grace. You two are a fairy tale. But look closer. Look at Grace's hand, the one clutching the stem of her wine glass. Her knuckles are white, not just pale, white, like bone. Look at her eyes when Jack speaks. She isn't looking at him with love. She is scanning his face. She is reading the micro-expressions around his mouth, the tilt of his head, the darkness in his pupils. She is calculating. She is terrified. And look at the house. Have you noticed? There are no personal items, no clutter, no stray mail on the counter. And the windows on the ground floor are beautiful, large, and airy. But have you looked at the windows on the second floor? Have you noticed the heavy reinforced shutters? Have you noticed that Grace doesn't have a purse, or a phone, or a key to her own front door? The dinner party ends. The guests leave, stumbling out into the cool night air, tipsy and happy, whispering about how perfect the angels are. I wish I had a marriage like that. One woman says to her husband, "Why can't you look at me the way Jack looks at Grace?" The heavy oak door clicks shut, the lock turns, and then the deadbolt slides home. The smile drops from Grace's face instantly. It slides off like a wet mask, revealing a face gray with exhaustion and terror. Jack turns to her. The charm is gone. The warmth is gone. His face is a blank, cold slate. "You spoke too much to Esther," he says softly. "I didn't," Grace whispers. Her voice is trembling. "I just answered her question about the garden." "You looked at her," Jack says. He walks toward her. He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't have to. "You looked at her as if you wanted to say something, as if you wanted to complain." "No, Jack, please, I didn't." "Go to your room," he says. Grace doesn't argue. She doesn't run. She turns and walks toward the hallway. But she doesn't go up the grand staircase to the master bedroom with the Egyptian cotton sheets. She walks to a narrow door under the stairs, the door to the basement. Jack unlocks it. She steps into the darkness. "No food tomorrow," Jack says, "and no painting." He shuts the door. He locks it. Grace Angel, the woman everyone envies, sits on a thin mattress in a soundproof cellar, listening to the footsteps of her husband, her warden, walking above her head. This is the marriage behind closed doors. And you are about to find out how a perfect dream becomes a perfect nightmare. To understand the trap, we have to go back to the bait. Because monsters don't look like monsters. They look like knights in shining armor. Grace was happy before Jack. She wasn't rich, but she was fulfilled. She had a job she loved as a buyer for Harrods. traveling the world, sourcing fruits and chocolates. But the center of her universe was her sister, Millie. Millie has Down syndrome. She is spirited, funny, stubborn, and deeply loving. Their parents were cold, distant people who wanted nothing to do with an imperfect child. So Grace became Millie's mother, father, and best friend. They had a plan. When Millie turned 18 and left her boarding school, she would come live with Grace. They would get a little house. They would have a dog. It was a simple, beautiful future, but Grace worried. Who would love a woman who came as a package deal? Who would accept that Millie would always be the priority? Enter Jack Angel. They met in a park. It was cinematic. Grace was dancing with Millie, spinning her around under the trees, laughing. Most men would look away. Most men would see a burden. Jack watched them, and he smiled. He was a lawyer, not just any lawyer. He defended battered women. He spent his days fighting for victims of domestic abuse. He was handsome, articulate, and seemingly endless in his empathy. He didn't just tolerate Millie. He charmed her. He brought her gifts. He learned sign language so he could communicate with her better. He listened to her George Clooney obsession with genuine interest. Grace fell. She fell hard and fast. How could she not? Here was a man who was successful, gorgeous, and who seemingly loved her sister as much as she did. He told Grace, "I don't just want you, Grace. I want both of you. I want to build a house where Millie can live with us forever." It was the answer to every prayer she had ever whispered in the dark. They got engaged in months. It was a whirlwind. Champagne, roses, breathless excitement. Jack was perfect. He wanted to take care of everything. "Quit your job," he said. "Let me look after you. You've worked so hard. Let me build us a home." Grace quit her job. She gave up her flat. She handed over her financial independence with a smile, thinking she was investing in a partnership. The red flags were there. They always are, but they were painted white. He didn't like her friends. "They don't understand our love," he would say. "They're jealous." He didn't want a big wedding. "Let's just make it about us." He insisted on handling all the paperwork, the emails, the arrangements. "Don't worry your pretty head." On their wedding day, Grace felt like the luckiest woman alive. Millie was the bridesmaid, glowing in pink. Jack stood at the altar, tears in his eyes. After the reception, they drove to the airport. They were going to Thailand for their honeymoon. But first, they stopped at a hotel near the airport for the night. Jack opened the door to the bridal suite. He carried her over the threshold. He put her down. And then the change happened. It wasn't gradual. It was instant. He looked at her, and for the first time, Grace saw the emptiness in his eyes. It was as if the human being had left the building, and something reptilian had taken its place. "I'm tired," she said, trying to ignore the sudden chill in the room. "It's been a long day." "You'll sleep when I tell you to sleep," Jack said. Grace laughed nervously. "What?" "I said, you'll sleep when I tell you to sleep." He grabbed her arm, hard. His fingers dug into her flesh, bruising it instantly. "Jack, you're hurting me." "I know," he said. "I like it." He threw her onto the bed, but he didn't touch her sexually. Jack Angel wasn't interested in sex. He was interested in fear. He sat in the chair opposite the bed and watched her. He told her the truth. He told her that he didn't love her. He never loved her. He hated her. "Why?" She wept, confused, terrified, thinking it snapped, thinking this was a psychotic break. "Because you have something I want," he said calmly. "Money? I don't have money." "Not money," Jack smiled. "Millie." The blood drained from Grace's face. "Millie? What do you mean?" "I like fear, Grace," he explained, as if discussing his favorite wine. "I like control. I like watching the light go out in someone's eyes. But adults get boring. They break too easily, or they fight back too hard. But someone like Millie, someone innocent, someone who trusts completely. He leaned forward. I'm going to keep her, Grace, in the house I built. I built a special room for her, and I'm going to play with her. And you're going to watch. Break. The horror of that moment is something that transcends language. It wasn't just a threat of violence. It was a betrayal of the soul. Grace realized in that hotel room that the man she married was a predator who had specifically curated his life to trap them. He defended battered women not because he cared about them, but because he wanted to study how to abuse someone without getting caught. He learned from the mistakes of the men he defended. He learned how to hide bruises. He learned how to isolate a victim. He learned exactly where the legal loopholes were. He had hunted them. He saw Grace and Millie in the park and realized they were the perfect targets, a devoted sister and a vulnerable dependent with no other family to ask questions. The honeymoon in Thailand was a masterclass in gaslighting. To the outside world, they looked like lovers. Jack held her hand. He ordered her food. He put sunscreen on her back. But he never let her out of sight. He took her passport. He took her money. He took her phone. Whenever they were in public, he would whisper in her ear, "Smile, Grace. If you don't smile, I'll call the boarding school and tell them to put Millie on a plane early." The threat of Millie was unleashed. He knew Grace would endure anything, beatings, starvation, humiliation, to protect her sister. Grace tried to run once, in a busy market in Bangkok. She shoved Jack and sprinted into the crowd. She made it 20 feet before he caught her. He didn't hit her there. He just hugged her tight, laughing for the onlookers, whispering, "Run again and Millie dies." When they returned to England, they moved into the house everyone envied. It was a fortress. The high garden walls weren't for privacy. They were to keep Grace in. The lack of a landline was deliberate. Jack had a cell phone. Grace did not. And then there was the basement. He showed her the room. It was stark. A bed, a toilet, a table. No windows. Soundproof walls. "This is your room," he said. "But the master bedroom, that's for show," he said. "For when we have guests, or when I decide you've been good. But mostly you'll be down here." He locked her in. Days turned into weeks. Grace's life became a routine of terror. In the morning, Jack would come down. If she had slept well, he was angry. If she had been crying, he was happy. He would dictate what she would wear. He would bring her upstairs. He forced her to cook elaborate meals. He invited neighbors over. This was part of his game. He needed an audience. He needed people to see the perfect couple. Grace had to perform. If she poured the wine with a shaking hand, she was punished later. If she didn't laugh at his jokes, she was punished. The punishment was usually isolation and starvation. He would lock her in the basement for days with nothing but water. He would describe the meals he was eating upstairs. But the worst torture wasn't physical. It was psychological. Jack loved to paint. He was an amateur artist. He set up an easel in the basement. He forced Grace to sit for him for hours. But he wasn't painting her face. He was painting Millie. He was painting scenes of what he planned to do to Millie when she moved in. Millie was still at her boarding school. The plan, the pre-Jack plan, was that she would move in with Grace after graduation. That was now only a few months away. A ticking clock. Grace stared at the canvas, at the distorted, terrified face of her sister that Jack was rendering with loving detail. "She's gonna love the yellow room," Jack would say, dipping his brush in red paint. "I painted it yellow because she likes sunshine, but there are no windows, just yellow walls, forever." Grace realized she had a deadline. She had to escape, or she had to kill him before Millie arrived. Because once Millie was in this house, in that yellow room, the game was over. Jack would have his toy, and Grace would be forced to watch the torture until she died. Grace tried to get help. She tried to signal the neighbors. There was Esther, a tall, somewhat awkward woman who lived nearby. Esther was different from the other sycophants who fawned over Jack. Esther watched. She asked probing questions. "You never go out, Grace," Esther said one day over coffee, while Jack was in the kitchen making espresso. "Why do we go for lunch? Just us girls." Grace's heart leaped. I can't. Jack needs a car." "I'll drive," Esther insisted. Jack walked in. He smiled. "What are you plotting?" "I'm stealing your wife for lunch on Thursday," Esther said boldly. "You can't keep her all to yourself, Jack." Jack paused. He couldn't say no without looking controlling. The mask had to be maintained. "Of course," Jack said, his eyes drilling into Grace. "That sounds lovely. Grace would love that." Thursday came. It was Grace's chance. Esther picked her up. Jack kissed Grace goodbye at the door. He whispered, "You have 1 hour. If you say a single word about us, I have a man watching the school. I'll make the call." Grace got into Esther's car. She was shaking. They went to a small cafe. Esther ordered sandwiches. Grace stared at the food. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. She devoured the sandwich, crumbs falling on her silk blouse. Esther watched her. "Grace, are you okay?" Grace looked at her. She wanted to scream. "He's a monster. Help me. Call the police." But she saw a man across the street, a man in a gray coat, looking at his phone. Was that Jack's man? Was he watching? Fear choked her. If she spoke, Millie died. "I'm fine," Grace lied. "Just dieting. Jack likes me slim." Esther frowned. "You're too slim, Grace. You look ill." "I'm happy," Grace recited the script. "Jack is wonderful." Esther leaned forward. "Grace, you can tell me. Why don't you have a phone? Why do you never answer the door? We like our privacy." Esther didn't buy it. Grace could see it in her eyes. But Esther didn't push. She drove Grace home. When they pulled into the driveway, Jack was waiting. He thanked Esther. He led Grace inside. He closed the door. He didn't hit her. He just smiled. "You ate the sandwich too fast," he said. It looked desperate. Esther noticed. "I was hungry, Jack. You haven't fed me. And now you've made me look like a bad husband," he said. "Bad wives need to learn lessons." He dragged her to the basement. But this time, he didn't just lock her in. He turned on the music. Heavy metal, blasting at maximum volume. He left it on for 3 days. Grace huddled in the corner, hands over her ears, screaming silently, losing her mind in the noise. When he finally turned it off, she was broken. She lay on the floor, dehydrated, hallucinating. Jack came down with a glass of water and a single cracker. "Millie comes in 3 weeks, he whispered. "Are you excited?" Grace looked at him, and in that moment, something shifted. The fear burned out, leaving only cold, hard ash. She realized that no one was coming. Esther suspected, but suspecting was enough. The police wouldn't believe her without proof. Jack was a pillar of the community. He was a lawyer. He knew how to hide. She had to do it herself. She looked at the cracker. She ate it slowly. She needed a plan that Jack, with all his brilliance and paranoia, wouldn't see coming. She remembered something, a small detail from their perfect dinners. Jack had a sleeping problem. He took sleeping pills, strong ones. He kept them in his safe in the study. But he also liked whiskey. And Grace knew from her days at Harrods, from her life before, that mixing certain sedatives with alcohol was lethal, or at least incapacitating. But she couldn't get into the safe. She didn't have the combination. However, Millie was coming. And Millie had a habit that used to drive Grace crazy, but now might be her salvation. Millie liked to collect pills. Since she was a child, she was fascinated by them, like Skittles. Grace always had to watch her to make sure she didn't eat them. If Grace could communicate with Millie, if she could get Millie to help her, but how? Jack monitored every phone call. He stood over her while she Skyped Millie at the school. The next Skype call was scheduled for Sunday. Grace sat in front of the computer. Jack stood behind her, his hand on her shoulder, squeezing just hard enough to hurt. The screen flickered to life. Millie's face appeared. She was beaming. Grace. Grace. "Hi, darling," Grace said, forcing a smile. "I'm coming soon. I'm coming to the yellow room." Jack chuckled darkly behind her. "Yes, the yellow room," Grace said. "Millie listened to me." She had to use a code, something only Millie would understand. "Do you remember the game we used to play? The Sleeping Beauty game." Millie frowned. "I like sleeping." "Yes," Grace said. "Bring your sleeping candy, Millie. Bring all of it for the party." Jack stiffened. "What is she talking about?" he whispered. "Just a game," Grace said quickly. "Sweets. She calls sweet sleeping candy." Jack bought it. He didn't know about Millie's pill obsession. He thought Millie was simple. He underestimated her. Millie looked at Grace. Her eyes, usually so innocent, sharpened. Millie wasn't stupid. She knew Grace. She saw the stress in Grace's face. "Sleeping candy," Millie repeated. "Okay, I bring it." The call ended. Grace let out a breath. Step one was complete. Millie would bring whatever pills she could scavenge from the school infirmary or other students. But pills weren't enough. Grace needed a weapon, and she needed an opportunity. That opportunity came in the form of a trip. Jack announced they were going to Thailand again for a baby moon. "But I'm not pregnant," Grace said. "We'll tell people we are trying." Jack said, "It helps the image." He wanted to go back to the hotel where he first broke her to celebrate. But this time, Grace wasn't the same woman. She started hoarding her own medication. Jack gave her anxiety pills to keep her docile. She learned to cheat them, to hide them under her tongue and spit them out later. She was building a stockpile. She hid them in the hem of the curtains in the basement. The day of the flight approached. Jack packed her bag. He checked everything. He was thorough, but he didn't check the tampons. Grace had crushed the pills into a fine powder and concealed them inside the applicators of a box of tampons. They flew to Thailand. The hotel was the same. The heat was the same. The fear was different. Grace played the part of the broken wife perfectly. She walked with her head down. She flinched when he moved. She let him believe he had won completely. Jack relaxed. Arrogance is a fatal flaw of every psychopath. He thought he had dismantled her spirit. On the last night of the trip, they sat on the balcony. Jack was drinking whiskey. To Millie, he toasted, "She moves in next week." Grace smiled. To Millie, she waited until he went to the bathroom. She reached for her bag. She pulled out the powder. She dumped it into his whiskey decanter, not the glass. He might notice the sediment, the decanter. She swirled it. Jack came back. He poured himself another drink. He took a sip. Grace held her breath. "Tastes different," Jack muttered. "Humidity." He drank it. He drank another. 20 minutes later, he stumbled. "I feel dizzy." "Maybe it's the heat," Grace said softly. "Why don't you lie down?" "No," Jack slurred. "No, you're up to something." He grabbed her throat, but his grip was weak. His eyes were rolling back. He collapsed onto the bed. This was it. Grace stood over him. She could kill him now. She could smother him with a pillow. But if she killed him here in Thailand, she would go to prison, a Thai prison, and Millie would be left alone, sent to a state home. No, she needed him to die in a way that looked like an accident, or she needed to frame him. She didn't kill him. She let him sleep. But while he slept, she took his phone. She unlocked it. She had watched him enter the code 1,000 times. She sent an email to Esther. "Help me. He's going to kill us." Then she deleted it from the sent folder. She took photos. Photos of the bruises on her arms. Photos of the locked room app on his phone that controlled the house security. Then she put the phone back. Jack woke up the next morning, groggy, hungover. He didn't remember passing out. He blamed the cheap local whiskey. They flew home. They arrived at the house. It was 3 days until Millie arrived. Jack was excited. He was manic. He spent hours in the basement, sharpening his knives, preparing the yellow room. "It's almost time, Grace," he hummed. But Grace had one card left to play, the whiskey at home. She had been saving the pills from the basement curtains. She had a handful. It was the night before Millie was set to arrive. Jack was celebrating. He opened a bottle of expensive scotch. He poured 2 glasses, one for him, one for Grace. "Drink," he commanded. Grace lifted the glass. "To the yellow room," Jack grinned. Grace threw the whiskey in his face. It burned his eyes. He screamed, stumbling back. Grace ran. She didn't run to the door. She couldn't get out. She ran to the study, to the safe. She didn't know the code, but she had a hammer she had stolen from the basement toolkit. She smashed the glass display case of his antique gun collection. She grabbed a revolver. Was it loaded? Jack was paranoid. He kept his guns loaded. Jack burst into the room. His eyes were red, streaming. He looked like a demon. "You bitch," he roared. "I'm going to skin you alive." He lunged. Grace raised the gun. Her hands were shaking, but her mind was clear. She thought of Millie. She thought of the yellow room. She thought of the years of silence. "No," she whispered. She pulled the trigger. Click. Empty. Jack stopped. He laughed. A wet, gurgling laugh. "It's for display, you idiot. It's not load." Grace threw the gun at his head. It hit him in the temple. He staggered. She ran past him. She ran to the basement door. She opened it. "Get in," she screamed. Jack turned. He was bleeding. He looked confused. Why would she want him in the basement? Then he realized the basement was his domain. If he got her down there, there was no escape. He smiled, gladly. He charged at her, pushing her through the doorway. They tumbled down the stairs together. Grace hit the concrete floor hard. Jack landed on top of her. He wrapped his hands around her throat. "I'm going to kill you slowly," he whispered. "I'm going to make it last weeks." Grace couldn't breathe. Black spots danced in her vision, but she wasn't trying to fight him. She was reaching for something. The bottle of whiskey she had hidden under the mattress weeks ago. The one she had spiked with every single pill she had saved for 6 months. She grabbed the bottle. She smashed it against the floor. The glass shattered. The liquid pooled. Jack flinched at the noise. Grace grabbed the shard glass. She jammed it into his shoulder. He screamed, rolling off her. Grace scrambled up. She ran for stairs. Jack grabbed her ankle. "You can't leave me," he shrieked. Grace kicked him in the face. His nose crunched. She ran up the stairs. She slammed the heavy basement door. She slid the bolt. She locked the deadlock. She slumped against the door, gasping for air. From the other side, she heard Jack screaming, pounding, threatening. "I'll get out, and when I do, I'll kill Millie first." Grace stood up. She walked to the kitchen. She picked up the phone, Jack's phone, which he had left on the counter in his pursuit. She dialed a number, not the police. She called Esther. "Esther," she said, her voice calm, eerie. Jack is in the basement. He's had an accident." Grace hung up the phone. Her hand was shaking so violently that she dropped the receiver. It clattered against the marble countertop, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the silent kitchen. From beneath the floorboards, a muffled roar vibrated. Jack, he was screaming. He was throwing himself against the heavy oak door at the top of the basement stairs. The door she had just bolted. The door that was the only exit from his soundproof dungeon. Grace. His voice was faint, dampened by the expensive insulation he had installed to keep her screams in. Now it was keeping us out. Open this door. When I get out, I will kill you. I will peel the skin from your bones. Grace stared at the basement door. She took a breath. Then another. She looked at the phone. She had called Esther. She had said, Jack had an accident. Why did she say that? Panic, adrenaline, the conditioning of a victim reaching for a lifeline. But as the oxygen returned to her brain, Grace realized something terrifying. If Esther came over, if the police came over now, Jack was alive. He was bruised, yes. He was bleeding from the glass shard she had jammed into his shoulder. But he was alive, and he was a lawyer, a brilliant, manipulative, psychopathic lawyer. He would spin it. He would say Grace attacked him. He would say she was hysterical, mentally unstable. He would point to the pills he had been feeding her. He would show them the medical records he had undoubtedly forged, and they would believe him because he was Jack Angel, the defender of battered women, and she was just a fragile wife. He would win. And then the yellow room. Millie. Grace stood up straight. Her spine, usually curved in submission, snapped into a line of steel. No, she whispered. She picked up a phone again. She dialed Esther back. Esther? Grace's voice was remarkably steady. She channeled every ounce of acting ability Jack had forced her perfect over the last year. Grace? Oh my God, what happened? I'm getting my car keys. Is Jack hurt? No, Esther. Stop. Don't come. Grace forced a laugh. It sounded brittle but believable. I'm so sorry. I overreacted. We had a row. A bad one. Jack slipped on the stairs, but he's fine. He's just furious. Are you sure? Esther sounded doubtful. You sounded terrified, Grace. Grace said. He was yelling. But he's leaving. He's packing a bag. He says he needs space. He's going to the cottage in Scotland for a few days to cool off. Oh. Esther paused. Well, maybe that's the best. Do you want me to come over anyway? Just to be with you? No, Grace said firmly. I think I just need to sleep. I'm going to take a pill and sleep. I'll call you tomorrow. Okay, call me if you need anything. Anything at all. I will. Thank you, Esther. Grace hung up. She walked to the basement door. Jack was still pounding. Thud, thud, thud. She leaned her forehead against the wood. Jack, she said. The pounding stopped instantly. He heard her. Grace. His voice was low, dangerous. Open this door. Right now. And I might let Millie live. You're not going to touch Millie, Grace said. Her voice didn't tremble. You're never going to touch anyone again. You think this door will hold me? Jack laughed. I have tools down here. I have a sledgehammer. No, you don't, Grace said. I moved the toolkit last week. Remember? You told me to clean the shelves. Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence from the other side. There is nothing down there, Jack, Grace continued. Just the cot, the toilet, and the whiskey bottle. I have water, Jack said. The tap in the bathroom. I turned the main water valve off upstairs. Grace lied. She hadn't. Not yet, but she would. You're bluffing, Jack snarled. You're weak, Grace. You can't do this. You'll crumble. You'll get scared of the dark, and you'll come running to unlock me. Maybe, Grace said, or maybe I'll just go pack my bags. You can't leave. You have no money. You have no passport. I found them. Grace lied again. In the safe. You left it open when you got the gun. Liar. Goodbye, Jack. Grace walked away. She didn't leave the house. Not yet. She went to the kitchen. She opened the fridge. She took out a cooked chicken. a salad, a bottle of white wine. She sat at the kitchen table, 10 feet from the basement door. She began to eat. She made sure to scrape her fork against the plate. Scrape, scrape. She poured the wine loudly. Glug, glug. She wanted him to hear. She wanted him to know that she was eating, drinking, living, while he sat in the dark. This was phase 1, the breaking of the breaker. The first night was a vigil. Grace didn't sleep. She sat in a chair pushed against the basement door, a kitchen knife in her lap, not because she thought he could get out. The bolt was solid steel, but because she needed to be the warden. Jack didn't sleep either. For the first few hours, he raged. He threw his body against the door until Grace could hear his bones crunching. He screamed obscenities that would make a sailor blush. He described in graphic detail what he would do to her eyes, her fingernails, her skin. Grace listened. She let the words wash over her. They used to terrify her. Now, they were just noise. They were the death rattle of a monster losing his power. Around 3 a.m., the screaming stopped. Then came the bargaining. Grace. His voice was softer, charming. The voice he used at dinner parties. Grace, darling, let's be reasonable. This has gone too far. We're both upset. Grace didn't answer. I'm hurt, Grace. My shoulder. It's bleeding badly. I feel dizzy. If I die down here, you'll go to prison for murder. Is that what you want? To rot in a cell? What will happen to Millie then? Grace smiled in the dark. He's scared. I can forgive you, Jack continued. We can put this behind us. I'll agree to let Millie stay at the school for another year. How about that? A compromise. Grace stayed silent. Grace? Are you there? Talk to me. Silence is the loudest weapon. Jack used it on her for months. Now, she was using it on him. By dawn, the bargaining turned to begging. I'm thirsty. Grace, please. Just a glass of water. It's hot down here. Grace stood up. Her legs were stiff. She walked to the sink. She filled a glass of water. She walked to the door. Jack. Yes. Yes, Grace. I'm here. I have water. Oh, thank God. Slide it under the door? No, the gap is too small. Open it just a crack. I promise I won't push. Grace poured the water onto the floor. She let it seep through the tiny crack at the bottom of the door. There, she said. Lick it up. A pause. Then a howl of rage so primal, it shook the floorboards. You bitch. Grace walked away. She went upstairs to the master bedroom. She showered. She washed the sweat and fear off her body. She dressed in her favorite clothes. Not the beige, modest outfits Jack picked for her, but bright red blouse she had hidden in the back of the closet. She packed a bag. She was leaving, not forever, just for a few days. Millie was waiting. Grace drove Jack's car. He had taught her to drive years ago, but forbade her from doing it. She found the keys in his jacket pocket. She drove to the train station. She parked the car in a long-term lot. She bought a ticket to the coast, where Millie's school was. She didn't call Esther. She didn't call anyone. She disappeared. For 3 days, Grace stayed in a small bed and breakfast near the school. She spent the days walking on the beach, breathing the salt air. She visited Millie. They ate ice cream. They laughed. Jack didn't come? Millie asked, looking around nervously. No, Grace said, holding Millie's hands. Jack couldn't make it. He had to go away on a long trip. Is he coming back? Millie asked. Grace looked at the ocean. No, sweetie, I don't think he is. Millie smiled. A real wide smile. Good. I didn't want to go to the yellow room. Grace froze. You knew. I saw the paint, Millie whispered. On his hands. Red paint, like blood. Grace hugged her sister so tight she almost crushed her. They were safe. Almost. On the fourth day, Grace drove back. The drive was agonizing. Her mind played tricks on her. What if he got out? What if Esther came over and heard him? What if the police are waiting in the driveway? She pulled up to the gates. The house was silent, dark. She unlocked the front door. The smell hit her first. It wasn't a strong smell yet, but it was there. The smell of unwashed bodies, of waste, of despair. She walked to the kitchen. "Jack?" she called out. Silence. She walked to the basement door. "Jack!" Nothing. She put her ear to the wood. She heard breathing. Shallow, raspy, wet. He was alive. She sat in the chair. "I'm back," she said. A groan. A weak, pathetic sound. "Water? Did you enjoy the whiskey?" she asked. "Please." "I went to see Millie," Grace said conversationally. "She says hello. She says she's glad you're gone." "Grace." His voice was a whisper. "Help me." "Why?" Grace asked genuinely. "Give me one reason." I. You have nothing," Grace said. "You are nothing. You are a sad, small man who hurts women to feel big. And now, you are the smallest thing in the world." She stood up. "I'm gonna make dinner now, Jack. Roast beef. Can you smell it?" She cooked. She filled the house with the aroma of food. She ate alone. She slept in the guest room. She locked the door, just in case. Day 5. The breathing was quieter. Day 6. Silence. Grace stood by the door. "Jack!" No answer. She waited an hour. She knocked on the wood. "Jack, I'm opening the door." Nothing. She didn't open it. She wasn't stupid. She waited another day. Day 7. The smell was worse now. It was unmistakable. Grace knew. She walked to the landline. She unplugged it. She plugged it back in. She dialed 999. She took a deep breath. She started to cry. Real tears. Tears of relief. Tears of trauma. Tears of the nightmare ending. "Emergency services," the operator said. "Help me." Grace sobbed into the phone. "Please help me. I've just come home and I can't find my husband." The police arrived in 10 minutes. 2 patrol cars. Sirens wailing. Grace met them at the door. She was wearing the clothes she had traveled in. She looked frantic. "He's not here," she screamed at the officers. "I went to pick up my sister. I was gone for a week. I told him I needed space. And I came back and his car's at the station, but he's not here." "Calm down, ma'am," the officer said. "Can we search the house?" "Yes, please." They searched the ground floor, the upstairs. "Is there a basement?" the officer asked. Grace froze. She put a hand to her mouth. Yes, but he keeps it locked. It's his wine cellar. He never lets me in there." She pointed to the door under the stairs. The officer tried the handle. "Locked. Do you have a key?" "No," Grace said. "Only Jack has a key. We need to break it down," the officer said to his partner. Grace stood back. She watched. Thud. The officer's shoulder hit the door. Thud. The wood splintered. Cracked. The door flew open. The smell rushed out. A wave of death. The officers recoiled, covering their noses. "Jesus Christ," one of them muttered. They drew their flashlights and went down. Grace waited in the kitchen. She didn't need to see. She knew what was down there. A man who had died of dehydration in a pool of his own filth. A man who had clawed his fingernails off trying to escape. A few minutes later, the officer came up. His face was green. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry." Grace collapsed onto the floor. She wailed, a sound of pure, unadulterated grief. Or so they thought. It was a sound of freedom. The investigation was thorough. Jack Angel was a prominent man, a lawyer. His death was big news. Detective Sergeant Adam Garrett. was assigned to the case. He was sharp, suspicious. He sat Grace down in the living room. "Mrs. Angel," he said gently. The door was locked from the outside. Grace looked at him with wide, tear-filled eyes. "I know. Jack." Jack was paranoid about security. He had locks on everything. But if he was inside, how did he lock it from the outside? "I don't know," Grace whispered. Unless what? "Unless it's slammed," Grace said. "The door, it's heavy, and the bolt, sometimes it sticks." Jack always complained about it. He said he needed to fix it. It was a seed she had planted months ago. Whenever they had guests, Jack would complain about the sticky lock on the wine cellar. He did it to explain why he kept it locked, to keep people out. Now, that lie was his coffin nail. He must have gone down for a bottle of wine. Grace sobbed, and the door slammed shut, and the bolt fell. "Oh my God, he was trapped. He starved to death while I was at the beach." Garrick looked at her. He looked at the fragile woman who seemed broken by grief. Why didn't he call for help? Garrick asked. "The basement is soundproof," Grace said. Jack, he liked to play loud music down there. He didn't want to disturb the neighbors. He soundproofed it himself. Another truth used as a lie. Garrick nodded slowly. "And you were away?" "Yes," Grace said. "I went to visit my sister. I was angry at him. We had a fight. I left. I didn't tell him when I was coming back." "Did you call him?" "I tried," Grace said. "But his phone, he must have left it upstairs." They found Jack's phone on the kitchen counter, with 20 missed calls from Grace. It was perfect, but there was one loose end. Esther. Esther knew Grace hadn't gone to the beach immediately. Grace had called her the night of the accident. If Esther told the police about that call, about Grace saying Jack had an accident, everything would crumble. Grace sat in the police station waiting room. She saw Esther walk in. Esther looked pale. She saw Grace and rushed over. "Grace." Grace stood up. She hugged Esther. She whispered in her ear. He locked himself in. "Esther, it was an accident, just like I told you on the phone. Remember? I said he slipped. He must have gone down there and got stuck." Esther pulled back. She looked into Grace's eyes. Esther wasn't stupid. She had seen the bruises on Grace's arms over the months. She had seen the fear. She had suspected Jack was a monster. She looked at the grieving widow, and she saw the steel behind the tears. Esther realized the truth. Grace had done this. Grace had killed him. And Esther smiled. She turned to the detective. "I can verify that," Esther said firmly. "Grace called me that night. She was worried sick. She said Jack was acting erratically. She said she was leaving because she was scared of him. She told me she tried to call him for days." She lied. She lied for Grace, because Esther knew what it was like. She had been married to a monster once too. The police ruled it death by misadventure. A freak accident. The heavy door. The faulty bolt. The soundproofing. It was a tragedy. A terrible, ironic tragedy. Grace inherited everything. The money, the stocks, the house. She sold the house immediately. She couldn't live there, not with the basement. She bought a cottage by the sea, a real cottage this time, with big windows and no locks on the interior doors. Millie moved in. They got a dog, a golden retriever named George. Life was good, but trauma doesn't just vanish. Sometimes, Grace would wake up in the middle of the night, sweating, hearing the sound of pounding on the floorboards. She would get up. She would walk to Millie's room. She would watch her sister sleeping peacefully, and she would remind herself, "He is gone. I won." One day, a package arrived in the mail. No return address. Grace opened it. Inside was a small painting, a watercolor. It was a picture of a bird cage. The door was open. The bird was gone. There was a note. I know what you did, and I applaud you. Esther, Grace smiled. She put the painting on the mantle. She walked out onto the porch. The sun was setting over the ocean. Millie was throwing the ball for George. Grace took a deep breath. The air tasted of salt and freedom. She looked at her hands. They were strong. They had built a life. They had destroyed a monster. She wasn't just a survivor. She was a warrior. And if anyone ever tried to hurt her or Millie again, well, she knew exactly how to use a basement. And that is the terrifying reality of Behind Closed Doors, a story that reminds us that the perfect couple you see on Instagram might be hiding a dungeon in their basement. Jack Angel thought he was a predator. He thought he was playing with a mouse, but he forgot one thing. If you corner a mouse, it turns into a rat, and rats fight dirty. Grace didn't just survive. She became the judge, jury, and executioner. She used his own prison to kill him. If that ending gave you chills, if the moment that's alive for Grace made you cheer, then you are exactly where you belong. You are a moon whisperer. Do not scroll away. Look at that subscribe button. It's right there. Click it. Join us. We are building a community of people who know that the scariest stories aren't about ghosts. They're about humans. And that bell icon, ring it, because the next story I have for you, it's about a therapist who realizes her patient is confessing to a murder that hasn't happened yet. You do not want to miss it. Hit the like button if you think Grace did the right thing. Hit the like button if you think Esther is the real MVP. Just hit it. Let the algorithm know we want more stories about justice served cold. I have a final question for you. A test of your survival instincts. Tell me in the comments below. If you were Grace, would you have let him out? Or would you have left him in the dark? Be honest. I will be reading every single answer. I'm your name. And remember, you never really know what happens behind closed doors. Good night, and check your locks.